Welcome back to Gharaj Graze, where the mysterious meets the mundane. I'm your host, Angelina, and today we have a story that will make you think twice about late-night train journeys. This chilling tale comes to us from Darian, who experienced something that defies explanation during what should have been a routine trip home. The year was 2011, and I was working in Chicago making the long journey back to my small hometown near Springfield every 6 months for my 2-week vacation. The train ride was always exhausted nearly 24 hours of clickety-clack rhythm and changing landscapes. But that particular October evening, when I boarded the 6 p.m. departure, I had no idea I was about to experience something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I'd packed my usual travel essentials, some snacks, a book, and the comfortable clothes I'd need for the long haul. The train was moderately full, and I'd managed to secure a window seat. Across from me sat a young man about my age named Tobias. We struck up a conversation early in the journey, sharing stories about our destinations and swapping food items like travelers do. By the time we crossed into Illinois territory around 3 a.m., we'd become fast friends. The gentle rocking of the train car had lulled most passengers to sleep, and I was fighting heavy eyelids when the train suddenly lurched to a stop. The abrupt silence was deafening. Without the constant rhythm of wheels on tracks, the night felt oppressive and still. Only a few passengers stirred, whispering among themselves about what might have happened. I glanced at Tobias, who had been dozing against the window. He sat up, immediately alert. "You feel that too?" he asked, referring to the unsettling quiet that had settled over our car. The conductor passed through shortly after, explaining that the main engine had failed. "Could be 5 or 6 hours before we get a replacement," he said matter-of-factly, as if this was just another routine delay. The train car had grown stifling without the movement-generated breeze, and many passengers had already stepped outside to get some air. Tobias and I, both smokers, decided to join them. We carefully climbed down from the high platform. No station here, just open countryside stretching endlessly in all directions. What I saw outside made my blood run cold. We were in the middle of absolute nowhere. No lights, no buildings, no signs of civilization anywhere. Just our train sitting like a metal serpent in a vast, empty landscape under a star-filled sky. The darkness seemed to press against us from all sides. Other passengers had spread blankets on the ground near the train, trying to make the best of the situation. But Tobias and I, being young and restless, decided to explore. We walked to a small elevated area about 100 yards from the train, where we could smoke and talk without disturbing the families below. That's when we first heard it. A faint sound carried on the wind, distant but unmistakable. It sounded like singing or maybe chanting. We strained to listen, and sure enough, when the breeze shifted toward us, we could make out what seemed to be voices raised in some kind of musical performance. "You hear that?" I asked Tobias. He nodded slowly. "Sounds like a church service or something." The logical part of my brain said it was impossible. We were in the middle of nowhere, hours from any town, but curiosity won over caution, and we decided to investigate. The train wasn't going anywhere soon, and we were young enough to think this was an adventure rather than a warning. We set off in the direction of the sound, walking across uneven ground dotted with bushes and small trees. The singing grew stronger as we progressed, and after about 20 minutes of walking, we spotted something that made us both stop in our tracks. A faint red glow flickered in the distance, like a candle flame or a small fire. It was the only light we'd seen besides our train's headlamp since we'd started walking. We pressed on, drawn to it like moths to a flame. What we discovered defies easy explanation. There, in the middle of this desolate landscape, stood a small structure that looked like it belonged to another era entirely. It was built from adobe or clay, with a crude thatched roof in a small covered area that might have once housed cooking equipment. The red glow came from a single lantern hanging from a post. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was the music. A old-fashioned radio or record player sat on a wooden table under the covered area, and from it poured the most beautiful spiritual music I'd ever heard. The voices were rich and haunting, singing in what sounded like Latin or some other ancient language. Two large speakers flanked the device, filling the night air with the ethereal sounds. We looked around for whoever might have set this up, but the place appeared completely deserted. There was a simple cot under the covering, and everything was arranged as if someone lived there. But we saw no one. "Hello?" Tobias called out. "Anyone here?" We waited but heard nothing except the continuing music. After a few minutes, we decided to sit on the cot and wait. Surely whoever lived here would return soon, and maybe they could offer us some water or coffee. The music was strangely soothing, and despite the bizarre circumstances, I found myself relaxing for the first time since the train had stopped. We must have sat there for 30 minutes when the music suddenly stopped. The silence was so abrupt it made us both jump. Then, from inside the small structure, came a voice. "What do you seek?" The voice was deep, resonant, and somehow seemed to come from everywhere at once. Tobias and I exchanged glances before I answered. "We're travelers," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Our train broke down a few miles back. We were hoping we might get some coffee or water if you have any to spare." There was a long pause. Then the voice spoke again. "You are welcome here, travelers. Rest, and you shall be refreshed." A figure emerged from the structure, and I had to blink several times to make sure I was seeing correctly. It was a tall man, taller than anyone I'd ever seen, dressed in what appeared to be a long, dark robe. His face was obscured by a deep hood, and he moved with an odd gliding gait that seemed to barely touch the ground. He approached us carrying a tray with 2 cups, which he set down on the small table beside the now silent music player. The cups themselves were unlike anything I'd seen in modern times. They looked hand-thrown, with intricate patterns that seemed to shift in the lantern light. "Drink," the figure said simply, then turned and glided back into the structure without another word. I picked up one of the cups and examined it. The liquid inside was dark and aromatic, like coffee, but with an underlying scent I couldn't identify, something floral and sweet. Tobias hesitated, but I was thirsty and tired, so I took a sip. The taste was extraordinary. It was like drinking liquid comfort, warm and energizing, and somehow familiar, though I knew I'd never tasted anything like it before. The fatigue I'd been carrying seemed to melt away, replaced by a sense of peace and clarity I'd never experienced. Tobias tried his cup and had the same reaction. We drank in silence, both of us trying to process what we were experiencing. When we'd finished, I called toward the structure to thank our mysterious host and ask what we owed him. The voice came back immediately. "You owe nothing. You are travelers, and this place exists to serve travelers. But you must leave now. Others come here soon, and they are not meant for your eyes." Something in his tone made my skin crawl. "Others?" I asked. "Do not question what you do not understand. Go now quickly before they arrive. If they see you, they will follow you, and that would be unfortunate." We didn't need to be told twice. We stood up, called out our thanks, and started walking back toward the train. But as we walked, Tobias zebed my arm. "Wait," he said. "When are we ever going to see something like this again? I mean, what if this is real? What if we're witnessing something incredible?" I knew what he meant. Despite the fear creeping up my spine, I was desperately curious about what others might be coming to this impossible place. Against every instinct screaming at me to leave, I agreed to hide and observe from a distance. We found a cluster of bushes about 50 yards away that gave us a clear view of the structure while keeping us concealed. We settled in to wait, though every fiber of my being wanted to run back to the train. We didn't have to wait long. The first thing we noticed was the sound, a low rumbling that seemed to come from the earth itself. It grew louder and more intense until it felt like the ground was shaking beneath us. But there was no earthquake, no physical cause we could identify. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, and numerous. It sounded like a large group of people walking in formation, but when we strained our eyes in the lantern light, we could see nothing. The footsteps stopped near the structure, and we heard the scraping of chairs or benches being moved, as if an invisible crowd was settling in for a gathering. The robed figure emerged again, and this time he spoke in a language I'd never heard before. It was guttural and rhythmic, like a chant or incantation. And incredibly, impossibly, voices answered him, dozens of voices, all speaking in the same strange tongue. But we could see no one except the robed figure. The gathering continued for what felt like hours. There were periods of chanting, periods of what sounded like singing, and periods of silence. Through it all, we remained frozen in our hiding spot, too terrified to move, but too fascinated to look away. Then we heard something that made my blood freeze. The sound of children playing. High-pitched laughter and excited chatter filled the air, along with the sounds of a game being played, balls being thrown, feet running, playful shouts and calls. And these sounds were getting closer to our hiding spot. "We need to go," Tobias whispered urgently. "Right now." But I was paralyzed by fear and fascination. The children's voices were so clear, so normal, that part of me wanted to believe this was just some community gathering we'd stumbled upon. But the complete absence of any visible people made that impossible. The playing sounds grew closer, and I could swear I felt the brush of small bodies running past our hiding spot. That's when panic finally overtook curiosity. I reached down and grabbed the largest rock I could find. Without thinking, I hurled it as far as I could in the opposite direction from the structure. The effect was immediate and horrible. A child's scream pierced the night air, a sound of pain and terror that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was followed by other voices, angry and agitated, speaking rapidly in that strange language. The peaceful gathering had become a chaos of shouting and commotion. "Run!" Tobias hissed, and we both took off toward where we thought the train was. But as we ran, we could hear them following us. Not the children, something else entirely. Heavy footsteps that seemed to cover ground faster than should be possible. The sound of pursuit that grew closer, no matter how fast we ran. We ran blindly through the darkness, branches tearing at our clothes and rocks turning our ankles. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit grew louder and more determined. I could hear Tobias's panicked breathing beside me, and I knew we were both thinking the same thing. We were never going to make it back to the train. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I tripped over something metal and went sprawling. Tobias fell beside me, and we both lay there gasping, waiting for whatever was chasing us to catch up. But gradually, we realized we could no longer hear the pursuing footsteps. We were alone in the darkness, lying on what I now realized were railroad tracks. Our train's tracks. "The train," I whispered. "Where's the train?" We looked around desperately, but saw no lights, no sign of the massive locomotive that should have been right there. The horrible truth hit us both at the same time. While we'd been having our supernatural encounter, the train had been repaired and had left without us. We were stranded in the middle of nowhere, with no idea which direction led to civilization, and something inexplicable had just chased us through the darkness. As we sat there in shock, we became aware of presences around us. We couldn't see anything, but we could feel them, large figures standing in a circle around us, breathing heavily, whispering in that strange language. The air felt thick and oppressive, like being underwater. "We're sorry," I said to the darkness. "We didn't mean to hurt anyone, we're just lost." The whispering continued, and I felt a weight pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. The last thing I remember was Tobias grabbing my hand, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on a cot in what appeared to be a small medical clinic. Sunlight streamed through windows, and a middle-aged woman in a nurse's uniform was checking my pulse. "Where am I?" I asked groggily. "You're in Cedar Falls," she said kindly. "Some track workers found you and your friend unconscious beside the railroad this morning. You've been out for about 6 hours." Tobias was on the cot next to me, just waking up. We looked at each other, both remembering the same impossible night. "Our train," I said. "We were on a train that broke down." The nurse nodded. "The night supervisor told me about that. Your train was delayed for about 4 hours with engine trouble, but it continued on around 7 a.m. Don't worry about your belongings, they'll be held at Union Station until you can claim them." She explained that we were about 15 miles from the nearest train station and that there was a bus that could take us there that afternoon. But first, she insisted we rest and eat something. While we recovered, a local man came to visit us. He was elderly with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. "You boys are lucky to be alive," he said after we'd told him our story. "You were found about 2 miles from the old Henderson place." "Henderson Place?" Tobias asked. The man's expression grew serious. "Cursed ground, that is. Family that lived there back in the 1800s all died under mysterious circumstances. Some say they never really left. People have been reporting strange things in that area for over a century. Most of us locals know to stay away, especially at night." He paused, studying our faces. "But you boys saw something out there, didn't you? Something that can't be explained?" We nodded, and he continued. "My grandfather used to tell stories about that place. Said it was a way station for travelers who weren't entirely of this world. Said sometimes the living stumble upon it, but they're not meant to stay long." The bus ride to the station was quiet. Tobias and I sat side by side, each lost in our own thoughts. What had we experienced? A shared hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion? A genuine encounter with something beyond our understanding? At the station, we managed to flag down a southbound train. The conductor was sympathetic to our situation and allowed us to board despite our lack of tickets. As we settled into our seats, I noticed Tobias staring out the window at the passing landscape. "Do you think it really happened?" he asked quietly. I thought about the taste of that impossible coffee, the weight of those unseen presences, the terror of being pursued by something we couldn't see. "I think," I said finally, "that there are things in this world that don't fit into our normal understanding, and I think we were lucky to get away from whatever that was." Tobias nodded slowly. "I keep thinking about what that man said, about it being a way station for travelers. What if we weren't the first living people to find that place? What if others have been there before us?" I didn't have an answer for that. All I knew was that I'd never look at a delayed train the same way again. Some detours, I'd learned, lead to places you're not meant to go. The train's whistle sounded as we pulled away from the station, and I closed my eyes, grateful for the familiar rhythm of wheels on tracks. But even now, years later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night with the taste of that otherworldly coffee on my lips and the sound of invisible children playing in my ears. Some journeys, I've come to understand, never really end. That was Darian's story, and I have to say, it's one that stays with you long after the telling. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, there's something about places that exist between here and there, between the known and unknown, that captures our imagination. Thank you for joining me on Gharaj Graze. I'm Angelina, and I'll see you next time for another story that blurs the line between reality and the impossible.